Hello all. So it's Devora Krasnianski from Adai, and we're really excited to have Rabbi Dr. Yossi Ives to be talking about dating tonight. We did have a tech problem, so we'll be glad that worked out. The topic tonight is 10 Commandments of Dating. And Yossi, we've been talking a lot about dating in the past, and I'm really excited to be actually doing this live with you about dating. So before we get started, let's talk a little bit about the work that you do with Shidduchim.
Okay, so I deal with the difficult ones. So I don't know why I got the short end of the straw. So most people, they come to dating with this very relaxed, easy feel. After all, what could possibly go wrong? You're going to go meet somebody nice and have a lovely conversation and maybe more. And if things don't go too badly wrong, we're going to have a great life together. So what's not to like? But many people will attest to the fact that that's not necessarily how it always ends up. And so we end up in a situation where people are hitting reality. They're finding that this process can throw up all kinds of roadblocks. And that's where it starts to become challenging. And what I try to help people to see is how they can get around those problems and get past those problems so that they can enjoy the same success of everybody else, the success that they're hoping for.
So you do a lot of coaching, you speak to a lot of people, so you have a real finger on the pulse of what's going on in the more difficult, but also you can make in what's happening in regular Shidduchim. So I'm really glad that we'll be covering this important topic of 10 Commandments of Dating. So how did you come up with these 10?
Well, they're not divine in origin, so that's disappointing. But I felt that it was about focusing on the principles, not focusing on the practice. In practice, there's a lot more than 10, and it's very difficult to choose which ones. But these are things which apply, if not to everybody, they apply very broadly. You know, just like the original 10 Commandments don't necessarily apply to everybody. For example, not swearing falsely only applies if you're actually in court and being asked to take an oath. But there are general principles about integrity. And similarly here, I'm hoping that these will be useful in people framing their dating in a constructive manner.
So you did send them to me in advance, and I know that they really cover a broad range of dating. So I'm really excited. So let's just jump right in. We start with the first one.
I think what would be useful is to give your listeners, viewers, a bit of a sense of the kind of real life situations that we encounter, and then to look at the 10 commandments, and we can then go to some questions. So I picked 4 random examples where many people will come across a challenge. And so the first one is communication. Most people are used to how they communicate. Some people are more talkative, some people are quieter. And so big deal, they learn to accept how they are, and they go through life being themselves, and they find roles in life that work to their strengths. And their family know them already and work with them in accordance with their personality. And so everything's more or less okay. But then you're presented with dating, and you all of a sudden have to start having these marathon speaking sessions when your usual conversation is 3 or 4 minutes. And rarely do you sit and talk to people about yourself, because people often find that quite difficult and uncomfortable. And so we have people who are being put in a very unfair position. They're being asked to go on a date and try to make a connection to a complete stranger whilst talking about themselves, which they never do and don't feel comfortable with. And it's not surprising, it doesn't work very well. So I've seen miracles happen. I've seen people who were monosyllabic, which is fancy English for barely able to put a sentence together. And their confidence levels were extremely low, and their fear level was extremely high. But with not even that much support, just a bit of coaching, a bit of encouragement, and a few practical tips, and maybe a chance to rehearse and get a little bit more comfortable with the kind of topics that they're going to have to discuss on a date, we're able to get by. And that's all you have to do, get by. That kind of person is never going to be chosen by somebody else because of their great oratory skills. So in the end, that's not what their selling point. Somebody's going to like them because they find them to be a decent, fine person. But they still have to get by. The conversation has to be able to be had. And luckily, once you get to know somebody, it changes the dynamic completely. But the first few dates, you have to get through those, and you have to be able to do so with a minimal level of proficiency. And that's an example of something which, if people aren't strong in that area and they don't get the help, we end up with high failure rates when it was entirely avoidable just with a minimal amount of support. Another example is that we have people who themselves are a little turbulent, let's say. They're a little all over the place. They're kind of go in different directions. They're a bit like of a grown-up toddler. And they have a quite excitable personality, maybe. And so, or maybe they're quite complex in that they have multiple interests that really have nothing to do with each other, and they have all these different sides to their character. And so they're looking for someone who fits with them, are often looking for somebody with a similar kind of disposition. Except that is really a very poor idea, and opens up many problems, because it's hard enough that they're so complicated and that they're so multifaceted. Now they're looking to meet somebody who's likewise, and the whole situation is burdened by this insane level of complexity. And so somebody like this can go through many years of frustration trying to find somebody suitable. And the minute they find somebody they really think this is brilliant because this person's very much like them, and then they realize that there are all these problems that come about. And once they understand that basic idea that they're complex, that they have a lot going on inside of their head, and that they would be a lot better off trying to find somebody who's much more serene, much more stable, much more balanced, less complicated, just more straightforward, then and appreciate and recognize how that is a blessing, and how that's actually going to complement them and going to give them a much more stable marriage and a much more stable home. Then once the penny drops, once that realization kicks in, then you see these people having a very different kind of success in their dating. I'll give you one final example. We see that many people, they get involved in dating, they find somebody they like, and things go pretty well, but then they reach a plateau, and then it just sort of goes date after date, sometimes 5 or 10 dates, without a whole lot happening. And the other party almost always is agitated and wants things to move forward, but the other person's extremely adept at finding a way to lower the expectation, to kind of calm down the situation and keep it going in this nice, happy space where we're friends, we're good, we're enjoying the dates, nobody's being mistreated, but yet nothing really is happening. And in the end, that niceness runs out when the person realizes, 1 second over here, we're not getting anywhere. It feels like I'm being used. It feels like I'm having my time wasted. That somebody's playing with my emotions here, albeit in a very kind and gracious way, but ultimately dysfunctional and hurtful. And this is something which I see happening a lot, and it's very upsetting, and it personally tears my heart to pieces to watch how all this is done with in a pleasant demeanor, but it's seriously unfair, and it's unhealthy, and that was not the plan. Nobody entered into this shidduch thinking that what was going to happen is it was just going to just be drawn out with no real purpose, just because nobody feels ready. And that not readiness is really not about because there's something concrete or something tangible or something even abstract that needs to be figured out, but just because this is the comfortable spot. That's the comfortable spot that that they found themselves in and don't feel ready to, don't feel comfortable moving beyond. And so those are examples where once a person realizes what's going on, and I'll come back to them later, we can get remarkable change, like almost instant. Okay, we're not doing this anymore. We're going to do it properly, and you can get a really happy result.
Okay, so lots of situations, lots of different things that we're going to that you encounter when you're meeting with people, and hopefully we'll talk about tonight about some things that people can keep in mind as they go dating, so they don't bump into such complex situations. So it's yours. What are we going to talk about?
So commandment number 1: don't assume that everyone will have the same dating experience. I touched upon this earlier. I call it the 80-20. 80% of people will have, within reason, a straightforward route to marriage. I'm not promising that they will marry the first person they date, but they will figure it out. You can't expect to have always success on the first try. But that's just because sometimes you just didn't meet the right one straight away. But eventually that will fall into place, and without too much trauma, without too much drama. And the way it will work is really this: you will meet somebody, and if that meeting goes well and you enjoy the experience and you feel comfortable with the person, and if you're very lucky, you even want to keep going back, meaning to say you're looking forward to each date, to the point where you see no reason not to stay and you decide to get engaged. That's what happens for 80% of people. Not everybody is exactly the same. Some people, it's really smooth and it's amazing. They meet the right person and hit it off straight away. Other people, it's a little bit longer, but more or less, that's how it works for 80% of people. But there's a 20% of people, which I think it's important to understand, they don't necessarily have that experience. And for them, dating is not going to be this blissful experience. They're going to hit upon something. Something is going to challenge them. It's going to provoke them. And they're going to have to face some kind of demon, some kind of internal obstacle, some kind of struggle. How are they going to do that? And I touched upon some examples already in the scenarios that were presented. And so it's really important that a person is open to the idea that they may need to discover what dating looks like for them. What is the right path for you? And that path may be having to overcome certain fears. It may mean having to reorganize one's priorities because you can see that not doing so is not going to work. And that can be hard because it's a lot easier when people follow their instincts, just do what they feel comfortable doing. And we'll come to that later on. That may not be possible for everybody. An idea that somehow everybody's going to have the same experience is why this problem becomes compounded. Because if we expect everyone to have the same experience, then when things don't happen, we feel somehow that we're a failure, and we're not welcoming this idea, okay, so now I have to figure out what works for me.
So in other words, what I'm hearing then is that don't even go into the expectation that there's a typical way. So even though 80% have a similar experience, it's best to go in not even thinking that there's a typical way of dating.
Have a certificate telling you which percentage you're in. So why start off with this assumption and then refuse to even imagine that when things are a little different, okay, I need to adjust. No, you just assume that your friend said that he met, and this is what happened, and he was so happy that he was bursting with happiness, and he was so excited for each date that he didn't know what to do, and so he couldn't sleep. And you're saying, what's going on? That's not how I feel. I must be set up with the wrong shidduch, right? Well, maybe, and if that's the first time, you may want to think that, but it's not true for everybody, and it's time we admitted that that's just nonsense. and that even within the 80%, not everyone's going to have the same delirious levels of enthusiasm. Everybody's a bit different, and we should just accept that every person needs to figure out what dating means for them. I don't mean to say you can read that in a book. You have to use your own experience. But what uses experience if you are not even open to this idea that maybe you have your own way? If you're assuming it has to be only one exact formula, then if anything doesn't happen exactly as you imagine, you'll put it down to the fact that the shadchalim are useless and sending me the wrong people, or that the people I'm meeting are no good, or something else, instead of the obvious thing, which is maybe I need to figure things out in my head a bit more clearly, and then I would understand a whole lot more.
So the flip of that also is like when we're giving advice, is not to say this is what you should do, this is what you should experience, or you'll just advice like you'll just know it when you know it, because that's not the same thing for everybody. So it's on the same.
Oh no, you've literally provoked me there. That's about the worst thing I've ever heard. It's terrible, right? How does anybody know that's true? That you'll know it when you know it, or whatever it is. Which scientific principle is that based upon? Do you know how much suffering that one phrase has caused? People who've just continuously said, well, I don't know it, so therefore it's wrong. But how is it possible that now my 10th shidduch and it's not working out? Why are we holding on to these kind of dogma? It's not like, with the real 10 commandments. This is made up stuff. We're much better off to do the opposite and say, how do you know you're going to know it? Some people will. And I know, and I wish everybody is in that 80%. It's easier. But if you're not, you're not. And it's not going to stop you being happy. So why don't we just start off with the assumption we're coming to dating with an open mind? We're going to have to learn from experience. But if we learn that things aren't what we thought, that's not the end of the world. That just means we need to figure out some new things so that we can be successful.
Okay. Come in knowing that you're an individual. Your dating experience is not necessarily going to be typical.
Yeah. Unless you're baking, you don't need a cookie cutter.
Very good. I like that.
Okay.
Number 2.
If you feel stuck, act sooner to gain self-awareness. This is a direct continuation of the first point. Why do people wait, men especially, until they've been through real misery before they're willing to do anything about it?
And inflicted misery.
Yeah. So what we want to encourage people to do is to find the right point. And again, everyone's different, so we can't say there's a certain number of shidduchim. That's the whole point. But people, if they're open-minded and they're reflecting on what's happening, will begin to see that something isn't making sense. Just like it would make no sense for someone to have one shidduch that doesn't work out and say, well, we got a crisis, we need to rethink everything, right? No, relax. You had one shidduch, try again. Like you don't speak to nobody, just it's okay, right? But just like you shouldn't overreact to one bad experience, even a terrible experience, right? I've had people who had maybe the first shidduch was just a horror show, and for a whole year they wouldn't meet anybody because they were traumatized. That doesn't make sense. One person having a bad experience, I understand it's upsetting. I'm not trying to belittle that, but that's not a reason to rethink the universe. But in the same way, it doesn't make sense that when you begin to see that something is not adding up, why do we wait sometimes years or even decades before we say, I need to figure this one out? Or as I put it, what is the one thing that you need to know so that your dating can be more effective? Just the one thing. What is it that you don't have in your mind now that if you did, could open up a whole new possibility for you? And that's something which is put off way too late for many people. So don't suffer for no reason. And people will say, well, what exactly is it going to help? Let's say I now know. How's that going to change anything? Well, that's not true. That changes everything. Something like 90% is solved. There's a Hebrew expression, just knowing the illness is half the cure. Here it's 90%. If you know that you have maybe fear of certain things, or you have certain anxieties, or you know that you have certain hang-ups, or you know that you're triggered by certain things, whatever it may be, right? Once you know, it has no power over you anymore. You can say, oh, right, I get it. That's because I'm triggered. That's not a big deal. I'm not going to, that doesn't mean the Shidduch is a disaster and I have to now look for somebody else. It's this self-awareness is such a relieving factor. It takes the weight off you. It allows you to see clearly and understand what's real and what's not, and distinguish between something which is a cause for ending a Shidduch or continuing because there's really no reason not to.
So self-awareness, what are ways we can gain self-awareness?
What if you can't?
What are ways that you can, like what can we do to get that self-awareness?
Well, I've never hidden the fact that we have a website called datewell.org, and
Right.
people can type in any word that they think may somehow be reflecting their feeling, whether that's confusion or whether that's anxiety or whether it's a red flag that they're concerned about. And there are others, I'm sure, who would be able to provide that kind of insight. But to ask questions, simply say, okay, right now, I've had a bad date. I came home unhappy. Okay, that's a fact. The question is why? That's not a fact, right? And if the answer is because I'm okay with a chit chat, but I find talking about personal things very difficult, well, then that's not the problem with the Shidduch, because that's going to happen with anybody you meet. Oh, that's a huge piece of information that's just fallen into your head. And so it's like a light bulb going on. I try to describe it like this. People do have real problems and those have to be dealt with. I'm not trying to suggest that everything can be dealt with self-awareness. If a person's, I just dealt with a situation literally 5 minutes ago with somebody who seems to have bipolar. And my advice was, you really should not be looking at Shidduchim at all until you know what the deal is there and know that there is a treatment plan for this person in place, because otherwise you're taking way too much of a risk and it's irresponsible. So, that's not self-awareness, that's treatment. That's having a professional guiding the person's healthcare plan. But many times, most times, I would say the vast, vast majority of times, it's not mental health. It's simply a case of self-awareness. So the way I would put it to you like this, imagine you had a room full of really sharp objects strewn all over the place. And your task was to get from one side of the room to the other, right? But the room was pitch black. So how are you going to get across without breaking your knee? So what you could do is very gently, softly, inch by inch, feel your way around. And if you find an object in the way, you're going to very gently move it aside to clear a path. You can't do this too haphazardly because you could harm yourself in the process, but gently you can kind of clear a path. The problem, of course, with that is it's very time consuming and there are risks of getting hurt in the process. Of course, the solution is to turn on the light, because if the light is on, you don't have to move any of the objects, you just walk around them. And so self-awareness is like switching on the light. You haven't changed. You still have the same hang-ups, the same anxieties, the same fears, the same issues, whatever they may be, are not gone away. But now that you know that they're there, you can say, okay, that's what that is. I'm not going to fall for that. That's just not a reason. And it's amazing what self-awareness can do.
We also did a talk recently with Shlomo Berzin about journaling, and that's another way to kind of get a sense of what's going on for you.
I encourage it. Absolutely. I just today told someone to sit down and write, somebody who's dating an absolutely fantastic person and amazingly was seriously on the verge of watching it kind of hit a brick wall. And after speaking to him, I said, go and write an essay to process your thoughts and figure it out and come to clarity for yourself, 100%. So I'll just end with one final thing on this point. There's a well-known teaching, it comes from a controversial source, but it's true nevertheless. And that is, if you know the why, you can withstand anyhow, right? It may be that you're still going to struggle with stress. It may be that those fears are still going to bug you. It may be that confusion, which seems to be wired into your brain, isn't going to disappear just because you don't like it to be there. But now that you know why you're uncomfortable, you understand what's going on and you understand what you need to do, you can deal with that. It's when you don't understand what's going on that it has such control over you, and it will completely sort of steal any real motivation or confidence that you can succeed with the Shidduch.
Okay, awareness.
Knowledge is power.
Next. Number 3.
Yes, remember that you are not dating yourself. I know that sounds obvious, but one of the things that has been one of the biggest shocks for me watching what's going on in the Shidduch world is how little this is pointed out. In fact, I can honestly say I don't think I've ever met anybody who's been aware of this. The focus people have, understandably, is on, I'm going on a date in order to find somebody I like. There's only one problem. You don't get to decide whether that person you like is going to be anything to you at all. And so 50% is, what are you going to do to give this person a reason to like you back? What are you doing to create a relationship with this person? And this is, I don't know why, not sufficiently emphasized. And so by making that small shift, it changes a little bit how you do things. Let's say you're thinking of a bunch of topics to talk about on the next date. So if your goal is to find out whether you like the person, your topics are ones that satisfy your curiosity, perhaps making the other person feel like they're an object in a museum. But if your goal is to build a connection with somebody and make that person feel comfortable, then you will go about these same topics differently, with a view to trying to give them an opportunity to shine, by trying to create conversations that allow them to feel good about themselves. Because if they do, they're going to be a lot happier that they came on that date. But it goes further. It goes a lot further. People don't understand that, to some extent, the person you get on the date is the person you created. In other words, to say that the same person shows up, but what kind of person? A person with a big smile on their face, ready to share, looking forward to a good conversation, or somebody fearful and uncomfortable? And what's the next tough question going to be? So we're kind of creating our own reality. It's kind of self-fulfilling prophecy, that when we come with a view that we want to bring out the beauty in the other person, that there's a very good chance that beauty exists, and you will see that beauty, and they will actually find the person more attractive in every respect. And so when people complain to me that they found the other person boring, there's an element to which I'm saying, well, maybe they are, and maybe there's a point to that. But I'm, back in my mind thinking to myself, did you do enough to make that person come out of their shell? Have you done anything to really give that person a feeling that they want to jump out of their skin and share and bare their soul in a way that would make the date more meaningful? I'm not trying to blame everybody else always. Sometimes it's not a good fit. And sometimes some people don't make an effort, and that's not good either. But I'd like to think that we can accept both things at the same time, that sometimes other people are not doing their part, but doesn't mean we're doing everything we can. And we should focus on what's in our hands, what's in our power. And then I would just finally say on this, that there are certain people who, by virtue of some of the things going on inside of their head, I call them preoccupations. The mind is busy dealing with its own stuff, can come across as disinterested. People can sometimes come and it look like they're far away. They're only half present. There's so much that they're dealing with inside of their own head, subconsciously sometimes, and sometimes not, right? So that it's not for people like that just about showing up on the date. It's about coming with a very clear plan to give the other person a really good experience. You're the host. They've come to your table. Quote the apostle, Al came bossa but sail korasi. You've come to meet me. I'm now going to make sure that even if it's difficult, that you're going to have a positive experience and go away happy that you spent the evening in my presence.
And that goes both genders. It's not just because the guy is taking out on a date that he's responsible
it's
for the
absolute.
conversation.
It's absolutely. In fact, I would say this. My comments would apply specifically to people who are more competent in this area, and that they should feel that it's reasonable for them to make more of an effort to manage the date, to come up with different ways to make sure that the experience is better. I'll just give you a practical example. Not everybody is comfortable sitting for 3 hours and talking. It's for some people, it's like overwhelmingly uncomfortable. And it just brings out all of their absolutely worst parts. And so if you can see that it's hard for them, why keep doing it? Why not break up the date into 3 parts and have a conversation for an hour, then go for a walk around the park, and then maybe go get a Slurpee or something, right? Break it up, make it easier, right? The other person doesn't have to suffer. It's not a mitzvah that you have to suffer on a date, right? And it doesn't mean to say because they don't enjoy dating, they're going to be a bad husband or a bad wife, right? You know, how many people sit for 3 hours in a hotel lobby talking as married couples? So it's not a skill you really need, and it should be understood that before a person goes on a date, you ask yourself, okay, who am I dating? What does this person need, him or her? It doesn't make a difference. What can I do to make this experience as good for them as I want it to be good for me? It should be an obvious thing. If you were going to a job interview, you wouldn't just go and say, well, I'm going to find out what I need to know about this job. You understand they need to hire you. What can you do to make that person feel confident and comfortable that you're going to be part of their company? And you would think, okay, what do I need to do to play this right?
Okay, so but traditionally or typically, the guy is the one who kind of plans the date. So what I'm hearing is that she could also say, you know, can we go someplace else about after an hour or so?
Okay, so I'm sure that's how they do it in Afghanistan, but I'm sorry, we live in a modern era and people should be prioritizing the health of the date and the health of the relationship over gender stereotypes. I understand on date 1 and 2, okay, I'm with you, okay, I get it. But you're sitting down on date number 3, you've got to a point now where you kind of have established that you're not completely sort of uninterested in each other. Why not just work out what's good for you? Even to say to the person, look, I'm thinking about what we'll do next time. What would work for you? Or to say, even on the 3rd date, would you prefer we just like took a break and went for a walk or did something different, right? Instead of thinking, no, I'm the man, so that makes me macho. So God forbid I should admit I don't know what the other person wants, and asking would make me seem like I'm a wimp. And I have to say, by the way, women, I'm sorry, but you punish men for being decent. I can't tell you how many times it drives me crazy. Why do we punish men for being kind and for being considerate and for saying, how many women have complained to me? Why does the guy ask me what I want? He's the man, let him decide. Right? What are you talking about? In a marriage, that's how you want it? You want your husband to basically just decide. So, oh, we're moving to Detroit. Oh, we are. When is that? Oh, whenever I decide, I'll let you know at least 5 minutes before. Nobody wants that in a marriage. Why do we have this absurd idea that a date has to be this guy is this God figure who just, you know, from on high decides what your next date is going to be? And then you complain, why didn't you say something? So no, we have to make dates have to work. People are not all the same. So we need to make sure that we make an effort to make sure the dates work. If not, why are we so surprised that people struggle?
Also, to build on that is like dating is also a little bit of a microcosm of the marriage. So you should be able to bring up your voice. You should be able to see if he hears you. So it goes all around. It's not just like he planned the date. And that's
100%.
how it used to be.
The only way that it would make sense otherwise is if we believe a date is this kind of other world place where normal rules of life don't apply. But I have to tell you, at times I'm literally tearing my hair out. I can't believe it. They're not just complaining, they're seriously like antagonized and want to end it because he's not enough of a man, right? As if to be a man, you've got to be some narcissistic dictator. That's just ridiculous. And I even had a situation where he said, I'm asking you because I want to make you happy. I don't want to do what makes me happy. I want to know what makes you happy. And she still cannot get over the fact and thinks this is a sign of weakness.
Or what I've heard that people say that we've gone out 6 times, he should have a sense of, or he should know already what I like.
I know. It's one of the major inadequacies of men is that they're not mind readers, right? Let me tell you the real inadequacy of men, that they think they're mind readers when they're not, okay? So just a marriage tip, you're not a mind reader. Best thing you could possibly do is ask.
Okay. We've covered that a lot. Okay, number 4.
Seek support, don't go it alone. I'll keep this one brief. We're coming to Hanukkah, right? The menorah needs a shamash, right? Even though the menorah candles should be able to manage on their own, it works better when you have some support. There are things you won't see yourself that others will see. I think that's pretty obvious. And sometimes people get stuck where they can see much potential, and there's definitely a lot that's positive, but there are certain things that are getting in the way, and maybe there's a foot height difference or whatever it is. There's a certain difference in Yiddishkeit level or something like that, and just gets to be an obstacle, and the person cannot decide, or very typically they don't have the strong enough feelings about the person, and on the other hand, they really respect this individual and they like them, and they just cannot make up their mind if this is something they can go for. And sometimes people will just come to a point where they won't figure it out themselves. There's just nothing they can do. For 20 years, they're not going to. And they have to be able to go to other people and say, look, what do you think? You know, you're smart, you're honest, you're experienced, and you care about me. So I'm going to take what you say very seriously, but I really need help, because as things stand at the moment, I'm stuck. And this is something which should happen, really, to be honest with you, across the board. I was just telling a mother half an hour before we started this session that one of the things we don't do enough is provide the kind of package of support for many people for whom dating is not necessarily playing to their strengths. And we put them in a situation without any assistance at all, and we watch them flounder, and that's not reasonable. We wouldn't do that in most other situations. Where we would put someone in a difficult situation, we'd make sure that they had the assistance that they needed.
But that being said, the caveat is, don't totally just listen to somebody without, if it doesn't feel right, the answers don't feel right, then it's worth exploring it further, not just let someone dictate your life.
Absolutely. I don't think support means dictating. I think it means, though, that people shouldn't take every suggestion from somebody that they turn to as they're telling them what to do. They're giving them food for thought. They're wanting them to see things from another perspective. And we should be open to that. And some people are really good about it, actually. They really do realize that dating is difficult. It seems simple, but it's actually not, and are ready to take advice. I will say that there's a flip side of it, which I wasn't thinking of talking about, which is where people ask 20 people for advice, and that makes them even more stuck, because you're guaranteed to end up with 20 opinions. So this isn't about asking everybody and anybody. And by the way, this gives me an opportunity to get on my other hobby horse, which is people should be discreet. I'm amazed. I was at a wedding just 2 weeks ago, and somebody comes over to me and tells me, oh, I understand so-and-so is dating so-and-so. How on earth did they know, right? How does word get around? These are two people dating. How does anybody know but them? And maybe the shadchan. So we should be discreet. We don't have to take advice from our friends, and definitely don't have to spill the beans on who we're dating, and everything has to be public knowledge. We're talking about being extremely private here. People are trusting other people with their dignity. So selectively seek support, but don't assume that you can always do it yourself. This is not a sign of failure if you look to others for help.
Well, it's a sign of strength. Throughout life, you'll just be able to move more quickly along when you get other people's perspective than trying to figure it out yourself.
Yes, but if you want to buy a car and you just think
Okay.
that you know what you want, you know what, go buy your car,
Okay.
right? It's no one's business whether they think you did well or not.
Fair.
But with dating, it's complicated, and for some people, it's very complicated. And if anybody's finding that they're struggling, the idea that they should think that this is somehow a controversial thing to look for outside support, that's got to be just rejected out of hand.
Okay. Number
Remember
5.
the most important quality in dating. Some years ago, I did a seminar for 150 not-from singles, and I asked them, what is the most attractive thing you could find in a dating partner? And everybody had an opinion, from appearance to wealth to intelligence to sense of humor to family background to social status, you name it. And I said, no, wrong, 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 wrong. They said, it's not possible. We've covered everything. I said, as hard as it is to believe, you've missed out the most important quality that's important to find in a date, which is that they like you. And they said, oh, but that's obvious. I said, how is it obvious? I said, I have met all 150 of you, and I wouldn't date even one of you. Okay? Why is it so obvious that somebody likes one? Why would a person want to spend the rest of their life with you, raising your children, sharing your home, being there for you throughout all your ups and downs? You know, I'm sorry, it's a big deal. And if somebody is indicating that they're sufficiently keen on you, that they would be willing to make those kinds of sacrifices and make those kinds of commitments, that is a huge, big deal. Now, obviously, that's not enough. You also have to find them attractive. You also have to find them suitable, compatible. There's not only one thing. You can have many things, but there's still one thing which is most important, without which you have nothing, which is that they have to like you. And I don't feel comfortable with the way that this is marginalized, the way that this is not even recognized. That I see people who've maybe, they've dated 15 people or 25 people. They've already by now found out it's not so simple. And yet there is zero credence given to the fact that this person is willing to date them. Not only that, is keen on dating them. And it's already showing signs that they would be seriously open to marriage with them. And none of that gets any value attached to it. And it doesn't make any sense to me at all.
Interesting.
And this is especially troublesome when you think that certain people, if they're being honest, know that they're not necessarily easy. Look, I'll be very honest. I'm not a regular person. And when I was dating all those years ago, I kind of understood that not everybody was gonna see me as being something they found appealing, right? I was under no illusion whatsoever. And to find somebody who actually appreciated me, I thought, okay, that's cool. That wasn't lost on me. That doesn't mean to say, okay, that's it, I'm marrying the person. But that was a big deal. That was a huge winning feature, that I realized that even though not everybody gets me, here's somebody who does. And that's something which I take very seriously. Which brings me to my biggest sort of hang up, which is Hamshachas Alev. This idea that everybody's the same, which is how we started this. As if Hamshachas Alev is something which applies to everybody in identical ways, is one of the worst crimes in the Shidduch scene, right? It's caused so many people to be torn up inside, so many Shidduchim to be broken up, so many potential marriages to have fallen to pieces because of an imaginary idea that everybody's going to have this exuberant enthusiasm. Some will, and most do. And it's a wonderful thing. I mean, it's a bit kind of looking on, it's a little nuts, but it's cute, and it's wonderful that they're so happy and they're so excited and they're so oblivious to each other's failings. It's almost absurd, but so what, right? But in that, we forget that the real Hamshachas Alev is the fact that you actually would consider spending the rest of your life with somebody, and that they would consider that with you. That's like, oh, that's nothing, right? Because I'm not dreaming of them all day, right? let's remember that the basics still count. The basics are, if you are keen enough on somebody that you would consider marrying them, that's 85%. Everything else is on top of that. And I'll use this opportunity just to add one more point, which is that when we're dating, we need to view the whole person. We need to take everything into consideration and look at the picture as a whole. Now, I understand there are certain things are deal breakers, and it doesn't matter. It's just not going to fly. You know, if you're dating someone who's not Shomer Shabbos and you are, I mean, I accept. Like, how are you going to make that work, right? If you want to have children and they don't want to have children, I understand. I mean, and so goes these are extreme examples, but I understand there are certain things. It's just, if as your concern, there's nothing to discuss. But very often that is elevated to pretty much everything. Everything is a deal breaker, in which case the term is meaningless now. So when we see someone, let's say, who struggles with a mental illness, or we see somebody whose maybe family background is not perfect, right? Or from a broken home, or maybe they have a lisp or something, right? It's so natural to focus in on the thing we don't like about the person and to obsess about it. And we lose sight of the really important things. And so this is not just about realizing if somebody likes you enough, that's a big deal. Doesn't mean you have to marry them, but take that seriously. It also means let that also ensure that you are able to see that situation, that potential shidduch, in a proportionate manner, so that you can kind of imagine what life could be like with this person and not just get fixated on the one or two things you don't like, which maybe you don't like. And I'm not saying you should. And maybe in the end you'll decide not to. But if you can't see things as they are, well, you're going to make very poor choices.
Noted. Okay. Number 6.
Treat success as more important than comfort. I wish everybody has, I really, with all my heart, wish they have just the most amazing dating experience. And that amazing dating experience is a prelude to the most amazing marriage experience. And that goes on to be an absolutely fantastic parenting experience. And it only gets better being a grandparent, right? I'm not trying to take away from anybody the hope and aspiration to have everything work out just perfect. But it's not realistic to make that an expectation and then to fall to pieces because that expectation, which was never promised to anybody, doesn't come to pass. Dating is fake. Dating is pseudo. You're taking two people and having them sit for hours and talk about who knows what. That's not what people do in real life. It's not what happens in a real marriage. I understand we don't have any other choice, okay? But when people go bowling when they're dating, I mean, I can tell you, I'm married 25 years. I haven't gone bowling with my wife once, okay? I don't know how much bowling features in actual marriages. Yet you'd be hard-pressed to find it hasn't featured in someone's dating. And I don't know how many couples sit in hotel lobbies for 5 hours and talk about what they did in the summer when they were 16 years old. And yet you go on a date and that's what you're supposed to be doing. So I'm not saying we can avoid it. Dating is a necessary evil. There isn't yet a better alternative. But we should at least realize what we're doing here. We're putting people in a very unnatural situation. And so here's what we have to ask ourselves. Would you rather somebody has a great dating experience or a great marriage? Now, of course, you could have both. But if you had to choose, which would you choose? So 3 weeks of positive dating or 50 plus years of happiness in marriage? So we kind of have to stop obsessing about dating as if this is actually marriage. That if my dating is not some exhilarating experience, this means my marriage will be a disaster. No, there is actually no connection. And so we have to be very skeptical before we judge what we think a marriage is going to be based upon the fact, right? How many things do people have in common when they're dating? What can they really talk about? They can't talk about their children. They don't have any. They can't talk about the house they're going to buy. Like, what are you talking about? They can't even talk until very later on about any wedding plans. You're left talking about nonsense for hours. And if some people don't do well in that environment, or they're forced to sit and talk about personal things they would never normally talk about with a stranger who could end up being the last time they ever see that person for the rest of their lives, because every single date, that may be the last time you ever see them. And we wonder why it's not necessarily for everybody the most natural experience. Come on, there's no reason to think like that. So, okay, I hope your dating experience is comfortable and enjoyable and pleasant. But if it isn't, does that mean to say your marriage will be a disaster? I'm sorry, it just doesn't work like that. So if you've had a difficult experience in dating, it doesn't mean you ignore it, but you break it apart, you analyze it. Okay, this wasn't so comfortable. What does this tell me? It may tell you that you're just not compatible. But it may tell you that you should get rid of this dating and get married because, frankly, you and dating is just not a thing. Or as I put it, you and dating is not a shidduch.
I actually, when I read this one, read Memory Prepared, I saw something else in these words. Treat success as more important than comfort, that have those uncomfortable conversations, because the success of the dating is more important than the comfort of or skipping those conversations. So I just saw that also in those words.
Okay, well, you're just way too smart for me, but I agree with the spirit of what you're saying. So let me just add a couple of points here. One is, some people will make much better husbands or wives than they make dates. And we're not looking for a date. In fact, we want to end the dating as soon as we can. Nobody's going on dates in order to have dates. They're going on dates in order to have marriages. So it's extremely important that people are able to just bear in mind that a date is only a means to an end. And I understand if a date is really going poorly, that may suggest that this person's personality doesn't work for you. And all of that's reasonable, of course. But sometimes this goes too far. And especially if a person's had a lot of experience with dating and realizes that they've not had a whole lot of success, maybe they need to kind of question whether dating is something that they thrive in, and maybe they should be less focused on dating and more focused on what looks like, the potential for this marriage. Again, it's difficult in a short format like this, where you have 10 commandments, to go into all the detail of how you unpick this. But this is possible. And it's definitely possible for a person who's had a bad date not to just come and say, right, the date didn't work out, I wasn't happy on this date, that means my marriage is going to be terrible, so why would I meet the person again? That is a calculus that is unfortunately completely wrong, as prevalent and as popular and as unquestioned as it may be.
Okay. Verse 7.
Get your priorities straight. This is more than just the obvious thing. Otherwise, it wouldn't be put here. It's not stating simply that people should not look for a spouse based upon factors that are of negligible relevance, right? If someone says, I want to marry this person because I really approve of their style of glasses, right? Then yes, that's lunacy, right? But that's so obvious, that's not what I'm referring to. What we're talking about is where people have fixations, means they are giving an emphasis to something way, way beyond what it really deserves, and don't realize what they're doing and feel unable almost to break out of it. There's almost like a kind of mild addiction where they feel completely miserable if they don't have this quality in a particular level of abundance. And sometimes it is not just imbalance, but it reflects a totally skewed idea about what dating is and what marriage is. And not surprisingly, therefore, it doesn't work. So let me give you an example. I actually made it illegal to use the word exciting when talking to me. That word is now officially banned. People tell me they didn't find the person exciting. Is this a rodeo? Like, how does that word come in? Like, I went to the dentist yesterday morning, and I came home and I said, The dentist is very good, but I mean, it was really not an exciting experience. Like, it's absurd. You're going to the dentist. How, in which way is that a word to use to analyze or to evaluate the experience with it in that situation? Why are we using the word exciting to describe our experience on a date? I understand, is this bungee jumping? So that indicates not just the person's got an imbalance, but that they fundamentally misunderstanding what they're doing. But why? That's because they're using this excitement to compensate for something else. They obviously have a lack of enthusiasm for what they're doing. There's something within themselves that is getting in their way, that's not allowing them to be able to come to the dating with a level of natural interest and engagement that is appropriate to be able to make a shidduch work. That could be because they have difficulty opening up. It could be because of difficulties of trust. There could be 100 different reasons why somebody may struggle, but they struggle. And they say, well, now I need the person to be super exciting, because if they're exciting, now I'm going to be interested. In other words, to say that I'm looking for person to be implausibly exciting so that I can somehow then overcome my inhibitions, my accumulated disinterest. And that is so wrong, because what it means is you're going for the least suitable person. Exciting people are the worst marriage partners, right? Marriage is a marathon. Dating is a sprint, right? Exciting people burn up, right? They have their flash of brilliance, and then they dissipate. What you want is a stable person. For 50 plus years of marriage, you need stability. Stability, by definition, is not exciting. It's the same. Something which is the same is never exciting. Exciting is the innovation, is the impulsivity. It's the surprise factor. So you see how in that one example alone, this obsession with exciting is not just that it's not a priority, because since when is exciting important? It's that it's completely skewing their whole approach to dating. Instead of them dealing with the fact that they need to realize they have certain internal struggles and learn to be aware of them, and therefore not to allow them to get in the way, they don't want to know, because that means thinking, and thinking's hard. Instead, why don't I just find somebody who's able to wow me so I don't have to think? I can just get excited about that, except that it's not a theatrical performance, and it won't work in the end. And the other person is not interested in dating you if all you're interested in is a theatrical performance. And so that's just one example of many. It extends itself to so many things, for example, to appearance or intelligence, where it's understandable you want a person to be attractive, it's understandable you want somebody intelligent, but these things become so implausibly elevated, they become so grotesquely exaggerated that this has nothing to do with the person's desire to be happy, and more to do with them dealing with their inadequacies in the absolutely least useful and least helpful manner.
Okay.
So before we move on, I'll make one more point. And here I'm not going to make this into a kind of black and white situation, but I think it's good for people to think about it. How important is it that you have the same interests as the person you're dating? That is not black and white, but at least be aware that there is an assumption, which I've not seen any evidence for, that is somehow a major advantage if you have the same taste in literature, if you have the same taste in music, if you have the same taste in food, the same taste in pastimes, and the list goes on. And I don't know where this comes from, but suffice it to say, it is utterly baseless. Okay, if that's your preference, fine. But then bear in mind, you should sacrifice other preferences so you don't overcomplicate your search for a wife or a husband. But you need to know that there is another way of doing it, which is equally valid, which is you don't have the same interests in them, but you have an interest that they have their interests. For example, he does gardening. You have no interest in gardening, but you think it's really cool that the guy knows how to garden, right? She does yoga. You have no interest in doing yoga, and you think you probably wouldn't physically survive if you tried, right? But you really think it's cool that she does yoga. You don't have to have the same interest. You have to have an interest that the other person has that interest. And that is equally, and I would say in some cases, preferable, because actually you're focused then on what you gain rather than on just the fact that, oh, you have blue eyes, I have blue eyes. Hey, we both have blue eyes. Isn't that cool? No, who cares, right? How does the fact that you have the same eye color enhance anything? She's into Harry Potter and he's into Harry Potter. So now what you're going to do? Go live in Harry Potter land? Like, why is that such a great advantage? It's more useful that the person has interests, that you admire that they have those interests, and that means they're a more interesting person to you. A person who's got more to offer, more to bring to the relationship. Then they have the same things you have, in which case they bring nothing. So I would just again ask people to contemplate that. If you're focusing so much on having similar interests, ask yourself, is this something you've thought through? Is this really important to you? If it is, okay, I back away. But if not, why have you taken it as a given that's somehow an advantage? Because it's not obvious that it is.
Okay.
On to 8?
Number 8.
Okay, no, you can intervene with pleasure. Don't let fear drive your decisions. I'm going to try to rush this a bit because I can't see the time, but I imagine we're using it up quickly. The reason why this is in here is because it applies in so many ways. This isn't fear of a specific thing. This is a fear that almost everybody will have some kind of element of fear. Because let's face it, if you're not afraid, then maybe you're a bit dumb. Think about it. This is a really big deal. And if there's no apprehension, then probably you shouldn't be dating because you're unsafe. It's like a person who's driving a rocket ship who's not a little bit afraid. This is a very dangerous thing you're doing. And even if you've prepared for it, and if the minute you stop thinking that you're doing something that is serious, you actually have a problem here. If we don't have fear when we're dating, it's only because we have certain emotions stirred within us that are so positive that they suppress the fear. So fear is a normal thing to have. In fact, fear is actually a very positive instinct, because if we didn't have fear as human beings, we wouldn't survive a single day, because we would do really dangerous things that would cause us great harm. The fear is what keeps us away from harm and keeps us safe. So I don't think we should be treating fear as something bad, but we need to be conscious that that our capacity for fear is a very primitive instinct. It doesn't have the ability to distinguish between real fears and imaginary fears. We will panic equally if we see a shadow or if we see a person with a machete. The brain's reaction will be identical. The brain doesn't have a whole lot of capacity when it comes to the instinct of fear, which is a very basic instinct that animals have as well, to necessarily distinguish between the two. And so we can just as well be paralyzed by fear over something that doesn't even exist than over something which is actually threatening our very existence. And so I think we need to come to, again, this is all about, in the 10 Commandments, it's not about the specifics. It's about saying, anybody going into Shidduchim, anybody involved in Shidduchim, let's just open ourselves up to this idea. Fear is normal. And even intense fear is going to affect a lot of people. That's no great shock. This doesn't mean you have to go rushing to get therapy. It means you're a normal human being who's now having to adjust to a very difficult process, trying to decide the most important thing you'll ever decide. And if it's overwhelming and it's causing you stress, that's normal. What we need to do is distinguish between normal stress and normal fear, and abnormal stress and abnormal fear, which is primarily whether it's a fear of something that is or something which exists entirely in our imagination. And what we find is that people are often afraid of things which have no basis in reality, and that's crazy. And we need to be able to help people to get more comfortable, more confident, and more aware. So, for example, a fear of opening up can be terrifying, but actually no harm is going to come to anybody if they do it. Or fear of failure, or people are haunted by the past. the list goes on. I think we need to treat fear as a normal thing, but we've got to challenge it. When we're afraid, that doesn't mean there's a problem. We don't know. It's an open question. It could be that my fear is telling me, my instinct is telling me, we have a problem. And you should trust that because your fear is helping you to avoid harm. But then you've got to go away and say, okay, let me unpack this fear now and understand where it's coming from. Because probably 50% of the time, the fears are based entirely on paranoia, on a discomfort with the unknown that is understandable, but is completely unhelpful and has to be exposed to clear blue daylight. And we can say, all right, this is me feeling uncomfortable with something I'm going through. That's not because the shidduch is bad. It's not because this person is not for me. And now that I understand what I'm going through, everybody can calm down. It's normal. It's not comfortable, but it's normal. And again, it's more important to have success than comfort.
But just to add to that, I don't disregard red flags. I think that goes back to one of our previous numbers of seek support. Don't just dismiss a fear because someone said that fear is normal. It's like really talk it through.
I think I just said 50% of the time your fears are legitimate and you should listen to them. But the problem I have is that 50% of the time, from my experience, those fears are fears that are driven by the person's discomfort.
Fear,
right?
But just to say, let someone else help you figure out if it's which way, because with some of the work that we do with domestic violence is red flags that people ignored. So I just want to bring that up.
100%. 100%. That's the 50% you should most certainly not ignore. In all of this, I think I'm just trying to put a question mark over people's reactions. You're reacting badly to somebody, you're reacting badly to a situation, you're having a difficult time with that. I get it, I respect that. I'm not trying to say shut up and carry on, right? I'm saying open it up for conversation, try to understand what's going on.
Fair, okay.
Number 9, understand what feelings you are likely to have. If I had $1 for every time somebody told me, I'm just not feeling it, and I'm not mocking this, because think about it. It's such a big thing to decide you're going to spend the rest of your life with somebody. To think that you're going to spend the rest of your life with somebody and you don't like them, you don't have real affection towards them, you don't have love towards them, that's a real mess. And so I'm not trying to make it as if it's some minor thing, but one needs to understand that just like with anything else in life, feelings is not one thing. Feelings is something that people are going to experience in a multitude of ways. Some people have stood in front of the Mona Lisa and literally they're shedding tears. I have no idea why, but it makes them very emotional, right? And there are other people who look at it and say, why is this even here? It's horrendous, right? Now, we don't have the same feelings towards things. It's just how it is. Some people walk past a puppy and their heart melts, and the other person doesn't even notice it. So we've just got to, again, come back to the same idea that some people are going to have overwhelming feelings towards a person that they're dating, and they say they know for sure it's the right person. They don't know anything, but their feelings are so overwhelming that as far as they're concerned, their brain has completely gone away with the fairies. So there are going to be people who are not going to have feelings in that way. And what I mean by that, to say not because they're dating somebody who's not going to bring it out of them, but because they are not a person who reacts that way. And if this is the first date, third date, fifth date, maybe you'll say, how do you know? But after 10 dates, you know. And it's dumb to ignore it because you're hurting other people, but you're also ruining your own life. And what we need to understand is that this is in the 20%. The feelings are going to be different. But in some of that 20%, I call it the 3%, the feelings are going to be pretty low. And if they're relying on waiting for them to have those feelings that their next door neighbor has, look how she looks at her chassan, it's like this, you're going to be waiting forever. You're not built like that. And so we need to be telling people the truth, which is, hopefully you'll be in the 80%, maybe you'll be on the top of the 80%, you'll be deliriously happy. God bless you. But what if you're not built like that? So what are you going to do? Insist that God got it wrong and you have to rectify it? In how? What therapy? What cure? Explain to me how you're supposed to rewire your brain. It doesn't work like that. And once a person sees a pattern, they have to be smart enough to realize that maybe for them, feelings is different than they thought. And they can still be extremely happy. Let me explain to you how. And very briefly, there's something called falling in love, and there's something called growing in love. Most of our relationships with people are always growing in love. Even, for example, when you see parents, you say that, have this instant love feeling towards their child. That's not even true. There's been 9 months for that child to develop and for the couple to get into the idea that this child is coming. But a child is a different relationship. It's biological. It's literally part of you. When you're talking about relationships you have with friends or other types of relations where you could be very close to somebody, those relationships have developed and evolved over time. And so the bottom line is this. Some people are going to grow in love. Their feelings are going to come as they get to know the person, as they're more invested, as they spend more time with the person and do things together and so on. If I could make this go away, I would, but I cannot. And I feel the truth, therefore, is a lot better off. People should just know that they may not be feeling it. But even in the rest of the people, I'm just going to be another 30 seconds on this. There are people who are avoidant. That means they find commitment extremely painful. Or they're dismissive, which means they find that part of them is ambivalent and isn't really that keen on the relationship and finds that the effort of building a connection to somebody quite tiresome and in a way that for other people it may be thrilling, for them it's not. Or they have an anxious attachment orientation, which means that they are very possessive and get very stressed when things, aren't going exactly how they feel they should. And they're going to have mixed feelings. They're going to have tensions. And those are going to affect how they feel. They're going to make them have a more complicated set of emotions about this. The idea that we should be shocked by this. Why? Right? As the Gemara famously said, Ein de'osem shavos. We don't have the same faces. We don't have the same minds. And we're going to experience dating differently. And if we can just accept that, I think it takes a tremendous amount of the drama away. It allows us to say, okay, maybe I'm one of those people who need to think about feelings in a different way. I will be just as happy, I'll have just as good a relationship. There's no evidence whatsoever that people who grow in their feelings have any worse relationships than people who fall madly in love and just lose their minds completely. There's no connection whatsoever between how you end up loving a person and how much happiness you have in that relationship.
Okay, so this question came in. So if you don't have those feelings, how are you supposed to know if you're making the right decision? Is it just pure logic, paper tests? What do you think?
It's difficult to answer that briefly because there are different reasons, and those reasons, I gave a bunch of examples and many more. Each one is a bit different. Let's say, for argument's sake, I have something I call this the people who cannot fall in love. Like that's less than half of 1%. It's like 1 in 1,000 people are just incapable of falling in love, period. Well, a person like that, there is nothing you can do. And I actually am very proud that I have a young lady, I can't mention names, who got married about 6 months ago. And after speaking to her for an hour, I realized she's just not capable of falling in love. End of story. I told her this, and she took it amazingly. I was sure she was going to be like so upset with me. Took it like a champ. And she's classmate of my sister's, and so my daughter's, and she called her up and says, your father, told the whole story because everyone's very private these days. And I was amazed to get the feedback. Like she accepted, this guy knows what he's talking about. He showed me how, he demonstrated it, and she accepted it. And you know what? She's married. It's amazing. Once people know the truth, they can come up with the strength to succeed, because there are people who are in hospital right now going through a leg amputation. The doctor says, in order for me to save your life, I've got to cut off your leg. And the person says, where do I sign? To their own leg being cut off, because they know that that's what they need for their own survival. So It's not like there's one answer for all of this. If a person has an avoidant, there's one type of solution. If a person's got, suffering from anxiety, they need to find ways to control that anxiety so they can keep their brain from completely going nuts. Everybody's a bit different. I want, for the sake of the 10 Commandments, we don't try to solve all the problems right now. We get people to a point where we understand if that's you, that's not the end of the world. And it's not, I am going to insist I'm going to have the feelings, even if that means I'm still dating into my 90s. Okay? That's why. What if you're just not built like that? Why have we told everybody they all have to feel the same thing? They're not to blame. We're to blame for having lied to them the whole time.
Okay. So for the person who asked, you could actually reach out to Yossi Ives.
Or go to Devora
somebody
or
else.
go to anybody else. But the point is, this is not it's not about who you speak to. It's about that you're asking the question. Once the question's been asked, we've had a victory. We've gone from, I don't have feelings, that means this shidduch is not going to work, to, I don't have feelings, I need to figure out what the heck is going on.
Okay.
Right? What does that mean? Maybe it means the shidduch isn't for you. I don't know. I'm not jumping to conclusions. But let's not make out as if it's obvious that no feelings means no shidduch. Okay? Some people have feelings to this level, some people to that level. We need to figure it out. I'm telling you that we would have hundreds or maybe thousands of people married right now if that alone, if that one issue of I'm not feeling it, we push back and say, well, 1 second, okay, but why? But why? Okay.
Number 10.
Date with purpose. Stay focused on what you're there to do. Okay, I'm about to lose everybody now, which is why the last commandment was thou shalt not covet, because after that, nobody stayed.
Okay.
So there's a massive difference between shidduch dating and let's call it secular modern dating. When you're on a shidduch date, you're there to answer one question and one question only. Is this somebody I wish to marry? If the answer is no, then there's no point you spending another second with that person. You've answered the question, go home. Okay, no more dates, nothing. You don't want to marry them, so that's it. Or you say the answer is yes, in which case you don't need more dates to get comfortable. You get engaged and you marry them. Okay, because you've answered your question. So there's nothing further to do. It's like a person goes to Macy's to buy a handbag. They found a handbag and now they're busy looking at handbags, but you have a handbag and you only plan to buy one. So what are you still looking for handbags? It makes no sense. Okay, so by the way, I love shopping, so I get it completely. Maybe people will say that's obvious, but I can tell you from where I'm sitting, I'm struggling with how much I should say here, but let us say that's not exactly what's going on in all of situations, and people are getting into patterns of dating where they're dragging it out without any obvious purpose, without any real reason, but simply because they're not, it seems, ready to get real and to do what they need to do, which is to make tough choices, which is basically what they sign up to do. But then it's called bait and switch. They start out shidduch dating, and then halfway through it switches to modern dating, and now they're having a friendship, and that friendship kind of works usually for one party far better than it works for the other party. And in the end, it leads usually to the disintegration of the shidduch. And it's completely unacceptable. And I would advise anybody who's the victim of this to put their foot down pretty much immediately. You're not interested, if that's not what you sign up to, you're not interested in being turned into a girlfriend or boyfriend. You're looking to answer the question. If it's a no, you're out. If it's a yes, okay, let's set a date.
That makes sense.
And I'm going to say something here which I haven't said before because I was afraid of excommunication. But now I've basically done enough damage, it doesn't even matter. This is not a judgmental comment. This is not meant to be lecturing people. This is not Rabbi Ives speaking, it's Dr. Ives. Can people please keep their hands in their pockets? I am not offended by people getting busy in ways that they never intended. but I see the consequences and I cannot understand how somebody would risk what could be 50 years of happiness because of momentary stupidity. And I'm not even getting into the unbelievably problematic halachic aspects of it, which I can't believe people would be so willing to break halacha publicly in this way in other circumstances. I don't think people would come with a ham sandwich on their date. But even if you put halacha aside, I see what goes on, and I see the consequences, and I'm seriously not in favor. So I would urge people, right, unless they can somehow convince me or themselves that they need to lay hands on the other person in order to know whether this person would make a good spouse for them, then why don't they focus on what they're there to do? Because the minute it turns into something else, you've completely lost the plot. It's what happens, it's called mission creep. Go check out what happened in Iraq. It normally results in hundreds of thousands of body bags. It's not fun, right? And I watch the consequences and I just don't understand, was it worth it to ruin the whole thing because somebody got a little overexcited? And so I would urge people to be very focused. And that's not just touching each other. I'm also talking about getting into stupid dating patterns where you just want to slide into this unfocused, let's just hang out, let's just spend more time, get more comfortable. For what exactly, right? The answer is there is no point in it. If somebody feels that they've dated and they need more time, then you sit down and say, okay, I can see you're emotionally further ahead than I am. I feel I need to have a couple more dates. Let's do this, and you're structured, you're focused, you have a plan, and you don't give the person the impression you're dragging it out. It's completely inappropriate.
Wow. Okay. That said, so thank you for these 10. If anyone has any questions, you can either raise your hand and we can allow you to talk, or you can send it through the Q&A, the chat. One question came in. We spoke about the most important quality. Could you talk about what are other important qualities?
Yes, I realize we're running quite late here.
I know, but I want to answer that.
Yes, in fact, I've got here some questions that were sent in, and one of them really was very, very cool. It says, the people who are interested in me are just not shaykh in terms of personality and future goals. How would I go about such a situation as I see Shidduchim not working for me? And that's a really fair question. And there's a bunch of points that I highlighted, but I'll turn to the one that you just addressed. The most important quality beyond the person liking you, which we said is foundational, is character. Now, there are two things. There's character and there's personality. They're not the same. Personality means whether they're loud or quiet, whether they're vivacious or withdrawn, whether they're talkative or whether they're a person of few words, whether they're very happy or maybe more sullen, and the list goes on and on and on. And those are more to do with personal preference. And there's no real benefit in one or the other. If you like a quiet person, that's good for you. And if you like a louder person, that's good for you. And I have no opinion, and nobody does. And the science does not suggest that any one of these qualities make you a happier or less happy person in a marriage. It's entirely down to personal preference. The only exception to that is if you're a very quiet person, you probably should avoid a very quiet person as well, because that way the marriage will be very imbalanced, the relationship will be skewed. You want somebody who's less quiet than you. But that's to do with balance. But the being quiet or being loud or any personality feature is not a factor in marital success. It makes no difference. It only makes a difference when you put two extremes together. Then you end up with two very withdrawn people. It doesn't make for a great interaction. Character isn't different. Character means we know scientifically that there are certain qualities absolutely vital and make a huge difference to marital success. And I'm going to give you the three most important ones very briefly. In order of importance: stability, emotional stability. People who don't act volatile, who don't have outbursts, who don't have extreme reactions, are going to end up being much more supportive, a much more stable, a much more wholesome person in a relationship. People, for example, who get angry, or people who get very upset, or maybe even over exuberant to the point where it becomes like it overtakes. You want things even. I know it makes the person boring, but it also makes them a perfect mate, right? You don't want someone so stable that they're a piece of stone. So the percentage you're looking for is between 70% and 80% is the perfect ratio. You want them to be sufficiently unstable that they get happy when they should be happy and get sad when they should be sad, but they stay mostly within a very healthy range. The second most important thing is agreeableness. Agreeableness means their niceness of character. Agreeable people don't overcompete. They don't competing with their spouse all the time. They don't get into conflict. They don't have problems sharing. They're generous with what they have. They're not protective of their own things. They're likely to be supportive and kind and caring. If they wake them up at 3 a.m. to feed the baby a bottle, you don't get a whole attitude. They're happy to help. They like to be fair. Again, you don't want that to an extreme because some people are so agreeable in this that they're a doormat. You want it to be within the 70, 80% range of agreeableness. That's the perfect range. And the third most important is conscientiousness, which means the work ethic. Life is not easy. Marriage is not easy. If somebody can't make an effort, if they're lazy, if their idea is let somebody else do it, and they will avoid doing anything if they can. There's a sink full of dishes. Let's see if I can guilt somebody else into doing it. Right? That person will soon outlive their charm. Right? All that nice, loving words will quickly ring hollow if they are not willing to make an effort when their effort is required. If it's always other people serving them, they don't know how to play fair, to put in their bit, right? That they'll finish the milk, but never think to go to the freezer to take out another one. In the end, that becomes a strain. And somebody who, in the reverse, has got an expectation that if things are difficult, let's say the couple end up in a disagreement, can happen, in fact, is inevitable. Are they willing to put in the effort to sit down and say, okay, we need to talk about this? As opposed to, you know what, I'm tired, I want to go, sit on my phone and I'm not interested. It's difficult, they bail out. That's not effective in a marriage. Again, you want 70 to 80. You don't want a person who's so conscientious or a workaholic and they literally are always on steroids. You want somebody who knows how to have downtime, who knows how to chill, who says, you know what, I'm done for the night. Not a person it's at 11:30 at night that's still looking to knock nails in. That's too much. Don't hyper. But you want a person who, for the most part, will take responsibility, won't wait for bills to accumulate until they're literally semi-bankrupt before they actually call up the electric company to settle their bill. Conscientious people don't wait for everything to fall around them before they do anything. They understand they're responsible adults and they take action before there's a crisis.
Important points. Okay, so just quickly, so how can we find out about their stability? People can just talk and may not be true.
Oh my goodness. MRI scan.
Really?
Dating is a beautiful thing, you know. Nobody should rush dating. I just gone and dissed it and said it's a necessary evil because let's say for a lot of people, that's how it feels. But dating is a beautiful thing because you spend many hours and you give a person, as I say, enough rope to hang themselves. You give them enough opportunity to say really dumb things. And you talk about these things. We need to talk about these things. Okay, what's marriage to you? Who does what in the home? What are the gender divisions here, right? If the gender divisions are, I get served and you do the serving, right? Well, okay, that's what you want. But you've been given a fair warning. People are not very good fakers. Maybe the first 2 dates, they do it the spiel, but then, people quickly show their true colors. And I don't, think, again, now where we're not talking practicalities, we're talking more principles at this session, that it's realistic to go into every single minutiae of on date 1, date 2, date 3, and so on and so forth, each date being different, how you would approach that. But suffice it to say, honest, open conversation, right? Leave the weather for another time. Talk real things, okay? How were you raised? What does a man do? What does a woman do? How would you respond if your wife asked you to do this? How would you respond if your husband asked you to do this, right? Who's going to pay the bills? Who's going to be responsible for the shopping? I know these sound like really mundane things, but that's what life involves. And these are things that should be part of the conversation that you have to really understand what the other person is thinking. I know there's a temptation to say what you want to hear, but people do let their guard down, and people do give much more way than I think we may imagine.
And that's very important. Okay, so I think that we have a few other important questions, but I think that we're going to have maybe keep them for another conversation, or we can have private conversations about these, because this has been a very long, very informative, very inspirational, and kind of blunt, straight to the point. I think that that's wonderful kind of conversation about so many important parts of dating. So thank you for this conversation, and thank you all for participating. And if you have any other questions, you could definitely reach out to Adai. You can reach out to Yossi Ives at Datewell, and you can figure it all out. We can really help you help yourself with your shidduchim. So thank you, and thank you all, and good night.
Thank you.